G'day, it's Paul Traynor here, Passionate Family Group Coordinator for Aotearoa, New Zealand. We're in a process of 2023 to put some sessions on video so it's more accessible for a small group. So, for example, if you're a Passionate Family Group, you can gather some of your team and watch this and then have an opportunity for discussion and hopefully just delve a little more deeply into Passionate Family Group. What are your aims? What are your goals? And this issue of decline is probably very real for anyone in Australia or New Zealand. The image that you see is, I think, says a lot. Because one is in decline, does that necessarily mean that it's finished, you're ended? Decline might be considered more a process. So my question is, does not equate to the end? I don't think it does. It's regarded typically of something regarded as good, something that becomes smaller. There's fewer of them or less, and it decreases, such as a thing like the birth rate. So we look at church life, attitudes, and Passionate Family Groups. Have they had their day? And like the church, are they in decline? What led to this was a comment that I received from a parish priest who said, I think Passionate Family Groups have had their day. No, I don't agree with that, but I certainly think that we can look at the whole issue of decline. Christianity is in serious decline in the Western world, and Africa and Asia are just beginning to experience what we in the West have been through. For 20 years within the Passionate Family Group movement, we have struggled to find people willing to take on leadership roles, and most of those who do are aged. Decline is not new, it's just accelerating. British Christians, for example, in 2011, 59% of the population. In 2022, 46%. Those of no religion in 2011 is 25%. In 2022, 37%. So let's look, both you, if you're watching this, you're to be either from New Zealand or Australia. No religion, 48% in New Zealand and 39% in Australia. In Australia, that means in 30%, so that equates to roughly 10 million people in 2016. For Christian, in New Zealand, it's 33%. In Australia, 53%. Catholic, 12.6% in New Zealand and 22% in Australia. Once upon a time, large numbers of active and excited people acted as regional coordinators in our Passionate Family Groups. Large numbers of Passionate Family Groups in big parishes. I can remember Lower Hutt in Wellington, and there was 24 groups. Many young families were involved. New parishes started, Passionate Family Groups at a rapid rate. For example, in New Zealand between 1988 to 1996, over 100 parishes started. A number of professed Passionists were involved of directors in each state in Australia and initially in New Zealand. Movements have an ebb and flow. They peak and dip. Sometimes they come, sometimes they go. Just as our own life has an end, so movements do too. Usually before they die, they decline. As I age, I think that's happening to me. So what can we learn from our own personal decline with aging about the pluses and minuses of declining? What are the obvious parallels? What are the obvious learnings? It's all around us in the church. In our local regions, we've had to deal with the declining number of priests and parishioners. This is in Australia and New Zealand. The results of ongoing amalgamation of parishes. Next, there's going to be super parishes, for example, in Christchurch, where they're bringing together, they split the diocese into 4 areas. For example, in Christchurch North, there's 5 parishes, and now that church, one of those, has been sold. But the people in family groups are still going. And mission parishes, which is brought up here and in Melbourne, has 4 to 5 parishes with 2 priests. Aged and migrants make up the majority of our local congregations. And most migrants do not join passionist family groups. So, the ideal passionist family groups of parents and children of various ages is actually rare now. Most groups can be described as faithful companions who have spent many years together and now are aged or aging together. It's a good question. Do members understand that a passionist family group is much more than it seems? They are gospel communities. Or are members interested or concerned about passionist family groups outside their own or their own parishes? Passionist family groups. Has COVID made this more the case? Amerchi says, our prayers, hymnologies and devotions insinuate a codependent allegiance to an all-powerful deity, a king-like hero above the sky who alone can rescue us from our depraved plight down here. This is a long way from Jesus, who invited us to be friends and not servants. The Jesus who pointed the finger away from himself towards new companionship, the kingdom, inviting us to co-discipleship in co-creating a better world characterized by gospel liberation. Life emerges. Life, for a time, declines and dies, only to re-emerge in a new way as a new life form. Our environment tells us that. Nothing that exists is actually lost. It's transformed. Like the cosmos. You die and the carbon is still part of the whole. No living organism, nation, company, or religious structure can avoid this decline. Most religious communities that have existed are now extinct. Mamuchu says 85% of the current congregations will not survive and only 10% will come to birth a new cycle. In the corporate world, only half of businesses survive more than 5 years. Over 33% survive more than 10 years. Sister Wittenberg, who's a researcher, says 90% of communities will not survive past 25 years. Religious women in the United States in the 60s, 185,000. In 2020, 45,000. The average age of the religious in 1960 was 35, and now in 2020 it's 68 to 75. That's 68 for males and 75 for women. Some will continue to operate at a low level or minimal survival. The dropout rate of pastor's family groups reflects this more or less. The stages of religious congregations, movements, as we go through the founding period, then a time of expansion, stabilisation, and then the breakdown, and which could be death or transformation. The butterfly is a good example of transformation. The caterpillar dies in the chrysalis and then comes to be transformed, something new. The pastor's family group movement reflects these stages. You listening are probably saying, yep, yep, yep. We are almost exclusively parish-based, but the parish structure is dying. And this is a question. How do you touch people in the sense of relating to them and building relationships when a lot have exited church life? Nearly all mergers and amalgamations work against creating or sustaining a community. And that's one of the problems. You bring three communities, and where I live in New Zealand, we had a parish which is now being closed down. The church is on the market to be sold. 5 communities. 3 of us are going to lose our churches. They're going to be sold, and there'll be one at one end of the parish and another at the other end. And already I've met so many people say, well, I'm not going. They've just been lost. They feel alienated, and they feel like, you've amalgamated the parish, but there's no consideration of us as the people who come here. So who will join? Declining numbers and advancing age will soon reach breaking point for many pastor's family groups. There will be no members to replace those who leave, and that could be through relocation, those who go to nursing homes or retirement villages or retirement homes, and those obviously who face death. There will be too few to maintain an effective life together. There will be insufficient members to undertake leadership. The peak days are, yes, we have to say, feels a bit dull, doesn't it? But dreary. Growth has peaked and the movement is declining. Our leadership has aged, but there are still many willing helpers. I know heaps of them who are just wonderful human beings, still reaching out to others. Jocelyn Franklin in New Zealand said, God doesn't retire anyone. Some parishes and some groups are still growing, and that can't be forgotten, nor can it be overlooked. So while we can admit that these things that we experience in the sense of decline, there are some parishes and groups growing. So there is hope. Access to individual pastor's family groups members is minimal. So the opportunity to be prophetic, pointing out the true potential, has always been challenging. Example, low attendance at formation days. Put these things on and you just get a small number who come along. So our regional teams will need to evaluate where they put their resources, especially their time and their energy. Some regions, some parishes, some individual groups are already on the path to dying. So an individual pastor's family group, or the parish pastor's family group movement and the regional movement, that cannot sustain or transform itself or be helped to move from dying to staying alive may need to be helped to let go. So that's an important process, and some of that leads to good ritual. You know, if we can't transform ourselves, if we can't, I've had it, I'm tired, I've had enough, and let's just keep to ourselves and die, then I think we've got to do that with some support and some help and with assistance. Let's not just go to the end and say it's not worthwhile. It has been worthwhile. These relationships are significant. We're not finished yet. So we can continue to live this message, even though it is in a process of decline. Some are already continuing, but do not want formal association. We have some of those. This means that we can provide regional teams with more energy for areas where there is potential and where there is vision and commitment. Just a couple of questions for you. Loneliness might be the deepest suffering of our time. Some sociologists have suggested that this is the new pandemic. Passionless family groups can help, but are we the ones to reach out to people within or outside the church? How do we do that? Can we do that? Can you imagine the Passionless family group supportive structure in 10 years' time, let alone 5 years' time? What would that structure be like? We can live with passion and enthusiasm despite decline. What do we need to keep connected, to keep people connected, and to welcome others to this experience? That's when we get to the whole, especially the concept of hope. What do we need to do? There are things that we can do, each of us in a Passionless family group, each member, if we concentrate on believing in the Jesus of the gospel, Emmanuel, God is with us. Then how do we keep people connected and welcome them to this experience? So maybe these things will help you, but this is what I suggest that we reflect on in considering this issue of decline. There are no gold cards in the gospel, so age doesn't come into it. Our service and care for others is not age affected. Jesus asks us to serve, to go out to others, to be for others, not to retire. The call is to go out, not retire. Laughter, fun, fellowship, support, care, listening, taking time, having time are all elements of building quality relationships. That's how we build and sustain our Passionless family groups. As Mary MacKillop said, never see a need without doing something about it. So let's join the circle and the family and continue to build Passionless family groups, a family for all.